Okay, so the name of the book is The New Cowboy, and the author is Rebecca Winters. Let's read a little bit about the back here. Oh, wait a minute, Donna, put those spectacles on. Even though I got the A-OK that my eyes seem to be improving on this side and disapproving on this side, we're going to put the spectacles on. Okay, here we go. Homecoming Cowboy. Living on her grandfather's ranch, surrounded by her loving brothers and their families, is helping Avery Bannock put her painful past behind her. But ever since Zane Lawson came home, she's been fighting her feelings for the rugged ex-Navy SEAL who's sworn to keep her safe in his arms. After a decade undercover, Zane's ready to settle down in Montana horse country. Buying the ranch next to the Bannock spread was the first step. Now he's got to convince the gun-shy archaeologist that he's the only cowboy for her. As they work together to find out who's stealing tribal artifacts from a nearby reservation, Zane will do everything in his power to win Avery's trust and turn their budding romance into a mission possible. Now, with a saying like that, how could you not want to read this book? Now, we're going to go over here to the beginning of it, where we're going to tell you a little bit about Rebecca Winters as an author. And then we're going to read the paper-clipped editions here with you. We probably won't get all the way through, but I wanted to make a good dent. Rebecca Winters lives in Salt Lake City, Utah, with canyons and high alpine meadows full of wildflowers. She never runs out of places to explore. They, plus her favorite vacation spots in Europe, often end up as backgrounds for her romance novels. Because writing is her passion, along with her family and church. Rebecca loves to hear from the readers. If you wish to email her, please visit her website at RebeccaWinters.net. Now, like I said, it took me a little bit to get involved into this book in particular. Usually, if it takes me any amount of time, I don't read it. But what caught my attention was when the grandfather got involved. And I was like, there's some sage in that. Sage wisdom, if you will. So, page 23. How's Avery these days? The Avery she'd always kept hidden from him. Those Bannock brothers had a beautiful sister who knocked him sideways the first time he met her. She's fine, but we don't see much of her. That sounded like Avery. She was an elusive creature with brown hair and unforgettable crystalline gray eyes. The nature of his work made it impossible for him to, page 24, be around her on a regular basis and really get to know her. When he did get some time with her, she seemed nervous around him. He didn't understand her reaction because he knew deep down she was attracted. There were times he felt her eyes on him when she thought he wasn't looking. Now that he was coming home, he planned to get to the bottom of it, and it was determining things were going to change. I love his determination. Page 35. No one knew what a year ago May love had hit her with the force of a supernova when Zane Lawson happened on the scene, but like the heavens, he was beyond her reach and would remain her secret. Unfortunately, Liz wouldn't let it go. She shook her head. I don't believe you. What's the real reason you don't want to see Mike again? To be honest, there's something about his personality that turns me off. That's too bad. It makes me sad because I'm worried about you. She had to tamp down a burst of temper. Page 36. Not everyone is lucky enough to find the kind of happiness that you found with Connor. To have a normal life was something that she had escaped Avery. But the news from the detective Reimer had taken away a gargantuan shadow. With it gone, she had to face a new reality. Her feelings for Zane ran so deep. The last thing she wanted was to give another guy hope that she was interested in him, especially not Mike. Page 41. Avery couldn't believe Zane was back. Ralph's praise, which Ralph is her grandfather, of him rang in her ears. Little did her grandfather know, she thought that Zane was the finest man she'd ever known. Heroic, honorable, exciting, fascinating. A man to match mountains she loved, and desirable beyond relief. belief. My eyes are playing tricks on me tonight, so I apologize. But soul-destroying fear nipped the heels of her excitement. He was coming home, ruining the news for her. During the years of therapy, Dr. Moser had helped Avery get to the point where she could trust again and accept going out on a date. After the assault, that was the progress. But the psychologist predicted that one day a man would come along who would make Avery feel the deep emotions of desire and intense wanting that she thought had died. As Dr. Moser pointed out, in order to have a full, loving physical and emotional relationship with this person, Avery would have to end the silence and tell him the truth about the assault on her. Avery had not been able to imagine that day ever coming when she'd meet such a man. And when it did, if she did, how would she, page 42, overcome the shame, the humiliation, the depression, anger, and fear, the guilt? It had been 8 years, and yet she was still suffering to some degree from all those emotions, especially shame. After her attack, she called the police from the hospital. Jared's aunt, Pauline, a nurse on the reservation, had always worried about Avery riding in the mountains and on the reservation alone. She continually to warn her that if, heaven forbid, she was ever assaulted, she should go to the hospital immediately for a thorough examination in order for the police to catch the culprit. When Avery thought about it, Pauline had given her amazing counsel years ago, but maybe it wasn't so amazing after all, if she too had the gift of vision like her husband, Charlot. It was very possible she'd sensed something about Avery's future had warned her. According to Pauline, there were too many assaults on the reservation. Being on duty at the hospital, she saw a lot of things, and she had shared that information with her. On the night of Avery's assault, Pauline's advice had rung in her ears. She went to the hospital and collected evidence, and the DNA had been entered into the file to help the police. Since that time, she prayed every day that her assailant would be caught so he couldn't hurt anyone else. But in all the years since, there had been no news until Monday. The doctor at the hospital had helped her find the right psychologist. Within a few days, she started self-defense classes, and she bought a handgun. She learned to shoot. The concealed weapon permit allowed her a certain amount of protection. She was doing all she could to prevent herself from being victimized again. But if she told Zane the truth about her traumatic experience, it would turn him off. He was too good of a man to be interested in a woman like Avery. On occasion, in his line of work as an agent, he had to arrest criminals, inflicting that kind of horror on their victims. She could only imagine the kind of taste it left in his mouth. Avery couldn't bear the thought of having him to put her in that category. When Zane had walked into the room at the funeral for Sadie's father, Avery hadn't been able to take her eyes off him. Everything about him excited her to her very core of her very being, and she knew that she met the man the therapist had been talking about. That was page 43. Page 44. His tall, hard-muscled physique had created a stir among all the women gathered there. At first, everyone, including Avery, thought that the brooding retired Navy SEAL was Sadie's lover from California. Before Jared knew differently, it had almost destroyed him to see Sadie with Zane. Beneath dark brown hair and eyebrows, his startling blue gaze had swept the living room at the Corkin Ranch without really seeing anyone. He seemed totally removed from the event, and had gathered Sadie's little half-brother in his strong arms to entertain him away from the others. It was when he smiled at his nephew, Ryan, that his hard-boned features gave way to faint dimples, melting Avery on the spot. In that moment, he looked up at her, and the world reeled away. The male admiration in his eyes lit up every cell in her body, and she was never the same after that. As Liz had remarked later that day, there wasn't a female in Montana who could be immune to such gorgeous man. If Liz hadn't been madly in love with Connor since high school, after meeting Zane, Sadie's divorced step-uncle, Avery learned that he had decided to stay in Montana rather than return to San Francisco. She'd been seeing him coming and going from the Corkin Ranch. And this is page 45. Shocked by the intense attraction to him, Avery fought it in the only way she knew how, and plunged into her work with more zeal than ever. For her to have divulged those traumatic 10 minutes to anyone beside the therapist made her sick inside, but when someone was a fabulous man like Zane Larson, she shrank from considering it. During Sadie's honeymoon, Zane had lived in the Bannock Ranch house for 2 weeks. Avery did her best to be friendly, but thought of encouraging him was overshadowed by the trauma of her past. Mentally, Avery knew she didn't have anything to feel guilty about, but emotionally she was crippled. She felt soiled by it. When Zane went to work for the Bureau of Land Management Law Enforcement in Glasgow, part of her had been relieved, yet secretly the other part of her was devastated that he went so far away. 5 months later, she spent one evening with him and the family in Las Vegas. She felt his desire when they had gone dancing with the others, but even though her fire for him burned hotter than ever, she made certain that they weren't alone together. She flew home from the trip to Nevada and resolved to throw herself into one of her crow projects, hoping to put Zane from her mind. A while back, she finally accepted a date with Mike Durant. Unfortunately, she hadn't realized she shouldn't have accepted it because she had been wrong. It had been for all the wrong reasons. Zane filled her mind and her heart. She couldn't possibly go on seeing Mike when there was no attraction on her end. The only thing to do was refuse to go out with him again after tonight, but how to do it without hurting his feelings was a tall order. He'd be there any minute. Zane would be arriving at his ranch any minute, and he wouldn't be leaving again. She could hardly breathe. Page 46. Moving to page 47. Suddenly Zane saw Avery come out the front door and the porch steps with a dark-haired man. Zane didn't recognize him. Something about the way he cupped her elbow told him that he wasn't there on official business. Zane's stomach knotted as he slowed down to get a better look. She dressed in jeans and a half-green western shirt and cowboy boots, and she was 5'7". He was stunned by the feminine picture she made with such rich sable-colored hair pulled back at the nape. In a different frame of mind than he was a moment ago, he drove on, but he kept his eyes trained on the rearview mirror. Before he could turn into the ranch, he watched the truck disappear in the other direction. How long had that been going on? Forced to swallow his disappointment, he gunned the accelerator and pulled into the driveway too fast. It forced him to take a stand on his brakes when he reached the ranch house. That was page 48. Next paperclip. Page 50. Whoops. Page 53. The second one came from Margaret Rogers, a ranger in Glasgow who was great at her job. They had dinner a half a dozen times over the past year. When they had been out on a case. Wondering what she wanted, he opened the message from her. This is Zane getting a message from Margaret Rogers. I can't believe you transferred. I got into the office this afternoon and learned you've been reassigned. Just like that, you're gone. What a shock. You're a cool one, Zane. Page 54. Lawson. I was hoping you'd stick around for a long time, but Ken told me you always wanted to transfer to Billings' office. I didn't know that. What has Billings got that we don't? Don't you know it's a hot spot for criminal activity of the Indian artifacts kind? One of my out-of-state sources says there's a mole in the BIA linked to the problems in the Montana sector. Watch your back. That news didn't surprise him. Zane appreciated the information, but he let out a relieved sigh that his transfer had come before he was forced to tell Margaret that he wasn't interested in her. Though when he never asked her out, she had known a relationship between them was hopeless. But she was an excellent ranger he trusted. He replied to her message. In answer to your question, I've come home to the people I love and I've missed. You're a fine ranger. Thanks for the heads up. I wish you all the best of luck in the future. Ranger Lawson. I feel kind of bad for Mike and Margaret if they could just meet up in the next book. Anyway, page 56. Avery was intimately associated with this project. She would have invaluable information about the hand-picked crew assembled to excavate sacred crow ground. Things couldn't be working out better. He was jubilant to be armed with a legitimate plan to get close to her through his first case. Tomorrow couldn't get here soon enough. He turned off the computer and wandered through the house. To the bedroom he turned into for Ryan. Now that his nephew was growing up, Zane needed to buy him some new toys for when he slept over. He wanted to take him shopping for some outfits. He ached for children of his own. To Zane, the greatest tragedy in his failed marriage was the fact that Nedra lost interest in having children. He married her at 23 when he was already a SEAL. Though he warned her of pitfalls, she begged for marriage and promised to remain strong, independent when he had to be deployed in a war zone. She had a great job with a pharmaceutical company and promises of rising higher. They mapped out their future. He assumed the stability of marriage and a family they'd been driving for. Unfortunately, she never conceived. The fertility specialist said they'd consulted hadn't found anything wrong with either of them. Perhaps the stress of Zane's job had prevented conception. He suggested they got therapy to help them, but Nedra wanted none of that. Page 57, by the way. It wasn't until the bitter end of the marriage that she admitted she'd been on the pill for 2 years without telling him. Her sin of omission was the biggest shocker for him to face. When she finally admitted what she had done, he reached for the breaking point. With that hope gone, there was nothing more to fight for. Clearly, she wanted out of the marriage with no pregnancy issues so she could have fun and excitement with the new man in her life who worked 9 to 5 and then came home. She met someone at her job who was going places, but that was old baggage. After turning out the light, Zane went back to his bedroom, and at that point he was in a new phase of his life. He had to think a year about what it was he planned to reach out for and what he wanted. Zane wasn't 23 anymore. A time when he was worried about getting married might be a mistake while he was in the SEALs. This time he knew exactly what he wanted. He knew the woman he wanted. Zane had glimpsed Avery from a distance, and tonight he was still sizzling from that bolt of electricity that had traveled through him at the sight of her in the green shirt and jeans. Tomorrow he planned to seek her out, and would use official business as the reason he wanted to talk to her. It was a springboard to the relationship he intended to have with her. One day soon, he would find out why she did her best to avoid being alone with him. He knew in his gut there was chemistry between them, and that was growing stronger every time they saw each other. You could hide a lot of things, but not the kind of sensual tension that picked up on every breath and heartbeat. That was page 58 and 59. Moving on. Page 61. Avery hadn't liked hurting Mike, but she had no other choice, and she told him the truth. The man she thought she could forget had come back into her life unexpectedly, though she didn't know what would come of it. Maybe nothing. She knew it wasn't fair to use Mike, and that was a terrible thing to do to anyone. Naturally, she mentioned no name, so Mike couldn't possibly know about her feelings for Zane, who had been away for close to a year, and had only come home periodically. But it was painful how stone-cold quiet Mike had gone on the drive home. Who could blame him? When they reached the ranch house, she jumped out of the truck before he could come around. "I'm truly sorry, Mike. Thank you for dinner. Please forgive me." By the time she made it to the porch, he peeled out of the driveway. She could hear the screech of tires even after she let herself in the house. Page 62. The unpleasant moment, compounded by the guilt of another she'd been carrying around for 8 years, had made her a fitful sleep. This was her focus, the only thing that was going to help her keep her distance from Zane. And that was page 63. Moving on. 65. Avery was just about to pull the key from the ignition when someone walked up to her truck. Suddenly her heart had another problem. Zane. Avery had been so upset that she hadn't noticed his Volvo sitting next to some of the other vehicles. He was dressed in a dark gray pullover and jeans. His hard-muscled physique, page 66, standing in his cowboy boots, made him a good 6'3", between dark fringe lashes, and his intelligent eyes glowed with twin blue suns. With shaky fingers she lowered the window. Now if she could just catch her breath. "I understand congratulations are in order for a lot of reasons. Welcome home. You didn't have to wait until the 4th of July after all." A ghost of a smile hovered around his mouth. "Even better, I'm here to stay. You missed a great party last night." "I'm sorry about that." He raked a suntan hand through his hair that looked like a rich brown loam. "Do you have another date tonight with that same man as last night?" She blinked. "How did you know about that?" I saw the two of you together while I was driving in from Glasgow. Avery couldn't believe it. She had been so upset with herself for having made a second date with Mike. She hadn't been aware of anything else. Biting her lips, she said, I have no plans for tonight. It's been a long day. Too long to go out on a case with me tonight? The police alerted the BLM law enforcement to a new problem in the area. Her head flew back, causing her hair to resettle around her shoulders. What do you mean? Now that I'm permanently stationed here, my undercover assignment is to catch the vandals desecrating the dig site at Arbosoki. A small cry escaped her throat. That's where I work. Sadie told me. He cocked his dark head. After all these months of working at the opposite end of the state, imagine my surprise when I saw my orders. It reminded me of a poem that says, God, long ago, drew a circle in the sand, exactly around the spot where you're standing right now. I was never not coming here. This was never not going to happen. The words and the way he had said them sounded like bits of a prophecy making their way to her soul, where she had to hide from him. She averted her eyes. I need someone to give me inside information. Who better than you? Tonight I want to drive there and get a feel for the place. We won't stay too long. If you'll come, this is 6667, if you'll come with me, 68. I'll feed you. Well, while we drive, I'd like to pick your brain. She cleared her throat, trying to keep her wits about her. You think someone I work with could be responsible? His eyes narrowed, sending a shiver down her back. You never know. Everyone is fair game at a crime scene. Zane was on the hunt. She could feel it, and shuddered for the people responsible when he caught up with him. You're right. If we leave now in my car, we should get there before it's totally dark. Avery couldn't very well say no to him under any circumstance. Her truck engine was still idling. I'll run inside and tell Grandpa where I'm going. Good, I'll wait for you. She raised the window and turned off the ignition. He opened the door so she could climb out. On a burst of adrenaline, she hurried into the house only to find out that her grandfather had gone over to Jared's for dinner. She told the housekeeper where she was going, then made a stop to the bathroom to freshen up. While she was running a brush through her hair and reapplied her lipstick, his words kept going around in her head. Page 69. I was never not coming here. This was never not gonna happen. Oh, what a man. I'm telling you. Dreamboat. Page 72. Zane, the crew will be really glad to know that you've been assigned here. He felt his pulse surge. I hope that means you're glad too, because I'd like to enlist more of your help for this case. She stirred in the seat. I'll do anything I can. What they've done is not only criminal, but immoral. How about coming over to the house tomorrow after we help Liz and Connor move into their new place? We'll combine forces and get all the information entered in my files. If he wasn't mistaken, her voice sounded a trifle unsteady as she said, all right, inch by inch, Lawson. I love his determination. I love that he's not giving up, that he sees the road is not going to be easy, but he doesn't throw in the towel at the first sign of trouble, and he sticks with it. Page 75. Had she been too young and frightened to say anything? Had he threatened to keep her quiet? Was that the reason she'd gone away to college and lost herself in her work, never letting anyone get too close for her, except to be with Ralph? That's her grandpa. She didn't spend a lot of time on the ranch, far from it. Suddenly something Jared had said last night gave him pause. When Zane had suggested she bring her date to the party, Jared had given him the oddest stare. Avery's so private, she'd never do that, especially not with someone she barely knows. Was it Jared knew? His parting comments to Zane stood out in red letters. Between you and me, we need more law enforcement around here. As Sadie said, there's nothing like knowing a special agent is going to be on the premises from now on. Had Jared been trying to tell Zane something? The very thought of crime being committed against Avery caused him to break out in a cold sweat. Sleep didn't come for hours. I'm going to try to get us to page at least 100, 120 tonight. Page 77. You probably don't need your visionary powers to know that I've been interested in your sister since I first laid eyes on her. You're her big brother. Now that I'm back for good, I want to pursue a relationship. Unless you know something I should know that would stop me before I make a big mistake. Part of me believes that she might be interested in me too. Jared took his time answering. I don't believe you're wrong. That was a huge omission coming from page 78. Jared, it meant he trusted Zane, and that meant something to him. Thank you for your honesty. Just so you know, last night I took her with me to the site at Arbosoki to investigate the vandalism. She went with you? He sounded surprised. Yes, and we got along fine, but when I brought her back, she went into her shell. The kind that's impenetrable. She's done that every time we've been together over the past year. You get so far, then you can't go any further. Jared's sudden stillness was the first clue that Zane had hit a nerve. I have a theory that she's suffering from a traumatic experience of some kind. You're right. Jared spoke right up, surprising him. When I told Uncle Chero I was worried about Avery, he said that her spirit was imprisoned. That didn't help me at that time, but talking to you about this does. His words gave Zane goosebumps. Then, having said this much, I need to ask you an important question. Now it was Jared's turn to appear impenetrable. If I've crossed a line and you want me to stop talking, just tell me. I won't bother you with this again. And the next instant, Jared shifted in his seat, so his back was resting against the door. Their eyes met in recognition that this was no idle conversation. You want the truth? I'm thankful Connor and I aren't the only ones who've grown alarmed by her behavior. Zane let out an anguished sigh. I'm thankful you just said that. Jared leaned forward. Do you have a theory? He nodded. Several come to mind. One of them being Ned, of course, Jared stated without hesitation. Yes, after what he tried to do to Sadie, it makes you wonder if he ever attacked Avery when she was younger. If she never got help and counseling, it could explain her emotional state now. His black brows knit together. The possibility that he'd gotten Avery long before he attacked Sadie had been a nightmare of mine and Connor's. She practically stopped dating when she came home from Berkeley. The date with the BIA guy was her first date in ages. Her lack of interest in dating is abnormal. We know she's not interested in women, so he didn't need to finish the thought. 78, 79, 80. Zane sucked in his breath. Let me offer a second possibility. I'm stretching now, and it may be far-fetched, but do you think she could have been diagnosed with a fatal illness years ago, one that would only give her a certain amount of time to live? Jared's face blanched. They were on frightening territory now. If your sister has a death sentence hanging over her head, it might explain her refusal to get involved with anyone. She knows that if your grandfather knew of her condition, it could only shatter him or worse. A mournful sound came out of Jared. If that's true, then she's been seeing a doctor nobody knows about, and she's hidden every symptom of what's wrong except her avoidance of men. I'm more inclined to believe our first theory. Zane nodded. A traumatic experience. The doctor I see in Billings would probably diagnose her with PTSD. You don't have to be in a battle to get it. If she ever around Ned when he comes to the ranch for supervised visits, no, but that's because Ned is only supposed to be with members of the immediate family, not the cousins or their extended family. Does Avery know what Ned tried to do to Sadie? Yes, Sadie told her. Did Sadie notice any kind of reaction in Avery that didn't seem normal? No, I asked her about that. All she saw was Avery's compassion. If Ned had done something to her, why wouldn't she have come forward at that time with what she knew to strengthen the case against him? I guess it's possible fear and shame, even a threat, had kept her silent. Jared stirred in his seat. Connor and I talk about this all the time. He started noticing changes in Avery when she first went away to college in Bozeman. She seemed to be fine at the time, but when she came back home 3 months later, she acted different. None of us could put a finger on it. Our grandfather noticed it too, as if she'd drawn a boundary around herself. You could only come so close. She's done that with me since we met, Zane mused aloud. According to you, it was 8 years ago that you first started to notice a change in her. She was 19? Page 80, 81, 82. Jared nodded. Maybe she was attacked by Ned right before she left the ranch, or else it was someone in Bozeman after she arrived at school. Either way, it's clear she's chosen not to tell anyone in your family about it. I wonder if she ever confided in a friend at school. I don't know, Jared muttered. As far as I could tell, she didn't stay in touch with anyone when she came home for visits on weekends, but she's always been close to her cousin Cassie. I remember her. Isn't she Ned's younger sister? Yep. Married Logan Dorney, one of the former hands. He had a falling out with Uncle Grant, and now he's a foreman over at Sam Rafferty's small hunting ranch east of here. Cassie does a little light housekeeping for Sam. If Avery confided in anyone, it would probably be Cassie. Zane rubbed his lower lip with his thumb. I'll keep that in mind for selfish reasons. I've got to go find out what happened to her. I'll do everything in my part to help. Both of them sat there haunted until it dawned on Zane they'd been gone too long. We need to get back. After starting the engine, they took off for Connor's new house. He looked over at Jared. I'm indebted to you for being so frank with me. I care about Avery. Today she's going to work on the vandalism case with me. Over time, I'm hoping she'll learn to trust me enough to talk to me about what's going on inside her. It isn't natural for such a beautiful, loving woman to have been emotionally locked up like this for all these years. As they got closer to the other house, Jared let out a groan. I'm counting on you, Zane. If we find out she was attacked by a pervert who's still on the loose, then I won't rest any resources until we find him and prosecute him to the full extent of the law. Zane was way ahead of him. Amen to that. I've got a few ideas to get her to talk to me, but what concerns me most at the moment is that Avery needs to get into counseling if she's ever going to be a whole person again. You're right. My sister is Grandpa's little darling. She's his biggest worry now. I think it's safe to say we're all worried about her, Zane said. While I'm investigating the new case, I'll keep working on her to open up. I know you will, too. As Sadie said many times, Avery worships you. Jared remained silent after that. 83, 84, 85. When they pulled into the new house, it occurred to Zane that maybe her worship of Jared was the reason she couldn't talk to her big brother. Not if shame she felt over what had happened by her was too great. Shame was often the byproduct of an assault. But had she been assaulted? How many explanations could there be for her behavior? He went over to his conversation with Jared. If she had been diagnosed with a disease that could only bring an early death, it could be the reason she refused to get close to any man, knowing she didn't have a lot of time left. The thought that she could be dying tore him to shreds. He had planned to find out what was wrong, but maybe they were running out of time and he needed to speed up the process. Together, he and Jared unloaded the display case and carried it in the house. Connor and Liz were thrilled with the gift. While everyone gathered around to help unload the rest of the boxes, he sought out Avery, who was in the kitchen doing dishes. Zane had to restrain himself from grabbing her around the waist and pulling her against him. Instead, he finished off the rest of the chips and guacamole in one of the bowls sitting on the counter and handed it to her to wash. Then he reached for a dish towel and started drying dishes. She glanced at him out of those dark-fringed dove-gray eyes. Thank you, but you don't have to help me. I'm highly motivated for us to get busy on that vandalism case, aren't you? She bit the underside of her lip. You know I am. His eyes played over hers. Just think, hundreds of years from now, some archaeologist will excavate this place and find parts of these bowls. One of them will ask, I wonder what they ate off of these. The other one will answer, isn't this seed we just found from the avocado family? Laughter pealed out at Avery, bringing her to life. You're amazing, you know that? He hoped so. In fact, he hoped he was so amazing she wouldn't be able to live without him. That was page 85. Oh. Page 86. Zane asked Avery to follow him through the house to the den. If you'll give me the phone numbers of your crew, I'll send them to the bureau where they'll pull up names and addresses and any background information for analysis. She brought up the contact numbers on her cell phone and gave it to him. Some of the crew now have come from universities out of state, but decided to work with Professor Osgood for the special project. When they were done, he got up from the swivel chair. I need to drive to Billings. There's an express mail facility at the airport. Come with me, while I ship the evidence bags and molds overnight to the state crime lab in Missoula. Afterward, we'll run by the site to see if there's any more damage that was done during the night. I'll need your eagle eye to know if there's been further desecration. Her heart pounded like a jackhammer from being with him again like this. She was taking a huge chance going along with him when he didn't need her assistance anymore. She could have stopped to see him, but until then she couldn't seem to help herself from falling in with his wishes. They left his place in the Volvo under blue skies dotted with puffy white clouds. The day was so gorgeous it hurt, but it wasn't just the weather and the season. She had to admit that it was Zane Lawson's presence that filled her with a sense of happiness and well-being that she'd forgotten existed. That was page 87. Page 88. He darted a glance at her. I'm curious, did you always want to be an archaeologist? Not at first. Jared got me interested in Crow culture when he took me out to the reservation. I loved their stories and their ways. I guess I was always fascinated when he spoke Crow with his family, I wanted to do the same, so I started taking lessons. I learned that Crow is a Sioux language. By the time I was ready for college, I decided to learn about the Plains Indians. One thing led to another, and before long I was hooked. That was in Bozeman? Yes. Did you live in an apartment? Why did he ask her that? Her hands went clammy. No, a residence hall with several female roommates. How did that work out for you? She realized he was just making conversation. If only her heart would stop pounding. Fine. I had roommates in SEALs. They saved my life on many occasions. Dr. Moser had advised her to stick with the roommate for emotional and physical safety while she dealt with her trauma. They turned out to save her life too, but she wanted to get off the subject. Did you love your life as a SEAL? Love is an odd word. I enjoyed it and found life stimulating, but you're living at a high level of intensity all the time. I prefer the life I'm living now. Super sleuth without burning all the cylinders at the same time. His chuckle wound its way through her, something like that. And I love the scenery. He stared at her as he said it. Avery felt as if she was suffocating. This hadn't been a good idea, but she couldn't ask him to take her back home. Your divorce must have been very hard. Not at all. What was hard was finding out Nadra had a lover and wasn't committed to me or the marriage. I kept hoping for children and discovered she'd been on the pill part of the time without telling me. Zane, she said with shock in her tone. That was the hard part. When the time came, it was easy to walk away. I've never looked back. Sadie needed help with Ryan. I was glad to leave San Francisco and be 88, 89, 90, 91. Able to support her and my nephew. Sadie had always longed for the ranch. When we got here, I could see why she and Eileen had loved it so much. Avery hadn't known all of this about him. He lived through a lot of pain. I've never seen anyone fit in so fast. Matt says you're a natural at ranching. He grinned. Since I hired him, he has that to say, doesn't he? Even though I know next to nothing about the difference between heifers and cows. Her eyes smiled at him. The point is, you're a quick study. When he says something, he means it, so you should feel complimented. You should have seen Connor's first wife, Reva. She couldn't stand the ranch. It tore my brother up for a long time. Obviously, ranching isn't for everyone, and not every marriage takes no matter how hard you try. I'd say Connor hit the jackpot with Liz. Grandpa always said they were two peas in a pod, but neither of them knew it until they went to finals together. Your family has found paradise here. I figure I'd come out to Montana in the late 1800s. I would have bought a piece of the land right around here, the way your great-grandfather did, but it doesn't matter if I'm 120 years late because I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm so happy for you, Zane. So what about you? The questions kept coming. Is the man you were with the other night someone important to you? She angled her head away from him. No. How many men have there been in that long string of hopefuls who asked you to marry them? And don't tell me that there weren't any, because I wouldn't believe you. She was starting to feel sick. Please, no more personal questions. To marry? Not many. Blaine Robertson's proposal in high school was the only one. Ben, their family's former foreman, had hidden at it. What about you? Have you met anyone since your divorce? Who tempted you to marry again? One woman has captured my attention, but these are early days yet. Her heart plunged to her feet. She wasn't even standing. You are mentally a healthy man to be able to say that after what you've lived through. If you mean I haven't lost the ability to trust after what my wife did to me, then you'd be right. But the fact is, not everything was her fault. Before we married, I questioned if it was a good idea or not. Being married to someone in the military, making the marriage work, takes extra dedication. I went into our marriage with doubts. That alone should have told me not to do it. 90, 91, 92, 93. You're an honest man, too. You remind me of Connor. He said that when he married Reva, that there was a part of him that feared she'd never be able to take to ranching. It turned out he was right. Yet we learn from our mistakes. I know I'll never make the same one again, he vowed in his deep voice. Look at Connor now. Second time around he found the perfect woman for him. Avery was still struggling with what he told her. With the frozen air in her lungs, she turned to look blindly out the passenger window. They already reached the airport. She sat there in a physical and emotional pain while he went inside to ship the evidence he gathered. He came back out with a smile before she had time to think. I'm glad we're going to see the site in broad daylight. I'm curious to find out if there's been more damage. That's where you can help me. It's going to be easy to miss. It's easy to miss clues in the dark. Is there anything you need before we leave town? No, but thank you for asking. Zane drove fast, totally unaware of his admission about a woman he had his eye on had done to Avery. While they headed for Abrazoki, he spoke of the desecration of some teepee rings in the pyros he needed to investigate. Clearly, he didn't intend to talk any more about his romantic leanings. She couldn't have handled it if he'd said another word. Avery was glad she didn't know more. All this time she'd secretly been pining for Zane. He had been interested in someone else. See how us women jump to conclusions when you men aren't clear with what your words say? Anyway. Wait till she told Dr. Moser. Now the burden of her ever having to tell Zane her secret, which means she has feelings for him, could stay buried. One thing was certain. She planned to move to the reservation soon. Her grandfather wouldn't like it, but she would need to do it for total separation from the past. 92-93. That's quite a conversation you're having with yourself. Zane's comment brought her back to the here and now. They'd been walking around the site. No one from the crew was there. The field looked deserted. 94. Sorry, I was thinking about the people who did this destruction. There have been too many of them over the years nationwide, with tens of thousands of Indian sites in North America alone. Thieves have had a field day. After they visited each excavated spot, he turned to her. What do you think? Nothing more seems disturbed. I agree. Do you think they'll come back? That's hard to say. Let's head for the White Lodge and have dinner before we go home. Now that she knew Zane's interest in her was only platonic, she felt wooden inside, though she couldn't believe it. Evidently all the vibes she felt for him were only those wishful thinking, which she was crazy since she'd been afraid to get close to him. Good idea. I didn't realize how long we'd been gone. Once again, they were on the road. In a few minutes, Zane's cell phone rang. He checked the caller ID, but didn't answer. She eyed him covertly. I take it that was an emergency? I doubt it. Even so, it could be important. Why don't you pull over and talk? We're not in a hurry. The person phoning me can wait till I call him back. Uh-oh. That must mean it's someone from your fan club. Come again? Sadie says you leave women in the dust all the time and don't even know it, she teased. Connor had the same problem. He flashed her a beguiling smile. Let me satisfy your curiosity. It's one of the rangers from Glasgow. I left before she knew I was being transferred. Sometimes she helped me on a stakeout. Is she married? Single? Divorced for a lot of reasons. My transfer came at the right time. You mean she'd been hoping you'd ask her out? Maybe, but I was never interested. That doesn't stop a person from hoping. She sent me an email yesterday, expressing her surprise that I had already gone. I responded and wished her well. I'll get back to her in a while. Right now I'm with you, and I'm enjoying it. Page 94, 95, 96. You can't imagine how happy I am to be running the office out of my own home. After your personal sacrifice in the military, you've certainly earned the right. It feels good to be doing what I'm doing, and I want it last. I like working alone with the freedom to carry out plans in my own way. I hear ya. Being on the crew at the dig site is the only part of what I do. Research takes up most of my time, and it's something I can do alone on my own schedule. We're lucky to love the work we do, he murmured. They came around the bend. White Lodge lay straight ahead. Let's go to the Rosebud, shall we? I hear their Saturday night barbecue isn't half bad. Avery chuckled to the camouflage her tore-up emotions. Such praise, Agent Larson. He pulled into the parking lot. They got out and entered the crowded restaurant. Zane had his name on the list before walking back to her. There's a 10-minute wait. Shall we go on in the bar on the other side till they can call us? Sure. He ushered her through the crowd with a certain authority that took her breath away. Avery saw every woman that stared at him. He wore a navy blue crew neck sweater and jeans. With his strong, tall build and the medium-cropped dark brown hair, no male in that whole state of Montana could begin to compare. I'm telling you, the state of Montana must have it going on. Zane found them a space at the end of the bar. There was only one stool. With his hand on her back, he urged her to sit. The second she did, she turned and found herself staring straight into the unfriendliest black eyes of Mike Durant. Oh, no. Avery couldn't believe it. He was seated on the stool next to her. He appeared to be alone. Good manners required something of her. She spoke first. Hello, Mike. Zane was watching them. Mike Durant, may I introduce you to my family friend, Zane Lawson? He nodded to Zane. I take it you're the guy who's come back to White Lodge? That's right. How did you know? Avery mentioned it the other night on our date. Mike was really angry, or he wouldn't have been so bold. She took a quick breath as Zane reached out to shake his hand. It's nice to meet you. Was that your BIA truck in front of her ranch? 96, 97, 98. Yeah, what a coincidence. I saw it before I pulled into my ranch next door. I've been transferred to the Billings BLM Law Enforcement Division. With all the vandalism going on, chances are we'll be bumping into each other from time to time on patrol. Mike finished his beer. We probably will. Good night. He gave up his stool. The guy sitting on the other side of him got up too, and they left together, working their way through the crowd. Avery felt as if she'd been shoved off a cliff. Zane took one look at her and said, We haven't been served yet, so why don't we leave? It's a short drive home. She didn't need any urging. When we get there, I'll fix you an omelet even Ryan gobbles down. Everything Zane said and did was getting to her. Again, she'd been so preoccupied with thoughts of him, she hadn't noticed the BIA truck parked in the parking lot. All of this could have been avoided. As he walked her to his car, she saw the truck take off down the street and going faster than was legal. Page 99. On their way home, Zane looked at her. He was angry enough to make you uncomfortable. Why was that? When he brought me home the other night, I told him I couldn't go out with him again. I hated hurting him so. I used the excuse that someone I cared about had come back into my life unexpectedly. You can't imagine my shock at seeing him in there. That explains why he wanted to flatten me. There was something about him. I felt his negativity. How long has he lived in the area? He was assigned here from Nebraska after the holidays. The elders at Crow Agency are depending on him to help track down the people stealing the artifacts. Have you ever seen the guy he was with before? No. After a moment's reflection, he said, I don't blame him for being upset I came in with you. Every man in that restaurant would have loved to deck me in order to be with you tonight. Under those circumstances, you have to admire his self-control. You're good on a woman's ego, Zane. God, I love Zane. Anyway, page 100. Since you used me as your excuse for turning him down, I think we're even. Heat crept into her face. Before I went upstairs to get ready that night, Grandpa told me the news about you coming home. It was the first thing that came to mind when I faced with my dilemma about telling him I couldn't see him anymore. I used you too when I replied to Margaret. I told her I'd come home to the people I love and missed. Avery's heart nearly failed to hear him say that. You've convinced me that the ranger has a crush on you. You've heard that saying, out of sight, out of mind, he murmured. Make me a promise, Avery, if Durant ever comes near you again in a way that makes you nervous at all, I want to know about it. I'm sure he won't. Sadie wasn't careful enough where Ned was concerned, and we know how that turned out. I promised your brothers I'd look after you now that I'm back. When did you tell them that? She shook her head. Ned wasn't normal from my first memory of him. It's very sad what happened to him. He did a horrific thing to Jared and Sadie by keeping them apart all those years, but I also have a hard time forgiving him for what he did to Cassie and her husband, even if he is in a mental facility. What do you mean? He bad-mouthed Logan to my uncle, and Grant had told lies about him sleeping with Cassie that weren't true. That's why Uncle Grant told Cassie he fired Logan, even though she swore nothing happened and she loved Logan. My uncle always was afraid of Ned. Everyone in their family was. Because of that, Uncle Grant was beyond listening to reason and warned Cassie that if she married Logan, he'd cut her off and she wouldn't be welcome at home anymore. Zane's body unexpectedly tense. Does anyone else know the truth about that story? No, I'm the only one, because Ned frightened her. She spent most of her time with me to get away from him. It was easy because our houses were so close together on the ranch property. We ended up sharing everything. Has your uncle made his peace with Cassie and her husband yet? No, Uncle Grant is a mess with so many 100 or 101, 102 regrets. He and my aunt are still on shaky ground. He needs counseling. I couldn't agree more. Sounds like your cousin Cassie needs it too. Since their family had to go in for psychiatric evaluation because of Ned, she's getting it now, thank heaven. Goodness. Counseling is a good thing. I know I needed it. You? I didn't get out of the seals without some collateral damage. She stared at him. You have PTSD? I do, but for the most part I have it under control. I didn't know that about you. He shot her a glance. Does that alarm you? Not when she'd been diagnosed with it herself. Of course not. Anyone who's lived through the war has demons. But what if you found yourself in love with someone with PTSD? How do you think you would feel? My heart would go out to him. But it wouldn't turn you off or frighten you? Was he afraid this woman he was interested in would be afraid? Not at all. And this is page 102 to 103. That's reassuring to hear because I have a favor to ask. What? After I fix dinner, I'll tell you about it. They pulled into his ranch and parked in for the front under a darkening sky. I don't need an omelet, Zane. A peanut butter sandwich will do me just fine. I'll make it. You and Connor are a lot alike, he quipped. While I check my emails, make me one too. Peanut butter's always been my favorite. They walked into the house. After she freshened up, she entered the kitchen and got out the bread and peanut butter. He joined her and added milk from the fridge. In a minute, they sat at the breakfast table to eat. What's all this favor about, Zane? I'm going on a stakeout at the site for the next 2 nights. I'll be gone tomorrow as well. Connor's letting me rent his trailer. I need a partner who's up to date on the case and can give me extra set of eyes and ears. His intense blue gaze fused with hers. Would you be willing to do me the honors? Zane wanted her to stay overnight in the trailer with him. Avery was so surprised that she stopped chewing. You mean you're going back there again tonight? 102, 103, 104, 105. He nodded. I'm heading to your ranch as soon as I hitch up the trailer. If your answer is no, I'll drop you off first. Then you can think the culprits are coming back. His eyes narrowed. I think they've waited long enough before they trying to make another haul of artifacts, as you pointed out. There are a lot more of them still out there in the ground. The police can't be there every night, and they know it. I plan to surprise them if they show up. But what about the trailer being in plain sight? I've obtained permission from one of the landowners to use their right-of-way road to park. Anyone watching around the assumed trailer will assume it belongs to the owner. He finished off the last sandwich and cleaned up the kitchen. Excuse me while I pack some things. Her heart was thudding against her again as they left the house a few minutes later in his truck. When they pulled into the ranch, he slowed down in front of the ranch house. What's your decision? He wasn't interested in her, but he asked her for help in solving the case, though she knew there would be a price to pay later. More than anything in the world, she wanted to go with him. Be with him one more time. I'll come with you while you hitch up your trailer. I'll hurry inside and pack an overnight bag. Good, I'll be back in 10 minutes. He stayed where he was. His headlights were on the trailer, or trained on her until she left herself in the door. The first thing she did was hurry down to the hall to her grandfather's room. He was still in there watching the 10 o'clock news. There you are. Hi, Grandpa. She kissed him. I'm back, but I'm leaving again and won't be home until Monday morning. He took off his glasses. Where are you going? Zane asked me to help him out on a case at the Orbezoki site. She watched and explained the details. We're going to keep watch. Well, as long as you're with him, I'm not worried. He'll catch those renegades before long. He didn't blink about her plans. That's how much he trusted Zane. 104, 105. I've got 106 marked. I want to go until, we have a stopping point. Okay, so it's 108, so it's not too far off. Okay, I'll call you tomorrow with an update. Love you. I love you. You too, darling. Give Zane my best. I will. She rushed through the house and up to the stairs she packed. In a few more minutes, she stepped out on the porch with a small suitcase. Zane was waiting in front. He'd driven up to Connor's black and silver trailer. Avery felt like the thief sneaking out in the night with some clandestine adventure. Excitement raced through her body. Zane levered himself from the truck and reached for her case, which he put in the back seat. When he walked around to open the passenger door for her, she climbed in the cab, but their arms and legs brushed. The contact sent a curl of warmth through her body. Grandpa sends his regards, she said to counteract his reaction. You're a favorite of his. The feeling's mutual. It comes with the territory of being related to Sadie. Not necessarily, but Avery's voice didn't voice her thoughts. Ralph Bannock was a shrewd judge of character and no one's fool. He'd been impressed with Zane from the very first day. 106, 107, and 108. Zane shut her door and walked around to get him behind the wheel. They took off. When we get to White Lodge, we'll stop at the supermarket, pick up some groceries, whatever sounds good to you. On the drive over, I'd like to hear about this latest book you're writing based on your thesis. She swung her head around, causing her to swish around her shoulders. Who told you about that? Your brothers. They're open on their praise. Jared's so proud of you he could burst, but he lets you know in different ways. Warmth filled her cheeks. The reason I know he cares so much is that he recently told me you honored his mother's people by undertaking their work. The undertones of the love were apparent. Tears smarted her eyes. Thank you for telling me that. I'm no writer in the sense you mean. What I am doing, as you already know, is working on a collection of stories from the Crow culture. They're a compilation of personal narratives, legends, myth, and historical traditions. My biggest struggle during the interviews is, if I'm granted an interview, is to translate the words correctly in order to preserve their stories with the greatest accuracy. It's painstakingly processed, and I work with a tape recorder. Sometimes it's overwhelming. You have to understand I'll be studying their language for the rest of my life. I'm still working on English, he quipped. Tell me one of their stories. She shook her head. You're just humoring me. I'm asked because I'm fascinated, he came back in a serious tone. Part of my job is dealing with a National Safe Indian Community Initiative. I'll be working with the Crow people from time to time for the rest of my life. I need to learn everything I can. She couldn't help but admire his inquiring mind. Have you ever heard of the spirits of the rivers? No, you'll have to teach me. Now it's page 108. Oh, 111's a small page. We can read it. Zane took her inside the store with him, and they bought what they needed so they wouldn't have to leave the trailer. Over the past year, he dreamed of being with her like this and could hardly believe it had become a reality. He considered it a major big breakthrough for her to stay with him in that trailer. Whatever had caused her to tense up on him the other night, he no longer had the feeling she was nervous around him. It seemed that since he told her of the woman he was interested in, she dropped some of her defenses and was interacting with more warmth and enthusiasm. But he wouldn't be able to keep up the facade for too much longer before she saw through him. Already he knew a few days and nights without holding and kissing her would never satisfy him. Then the truth of his feelings would have to come out. Yeah, we'll stop right there. I don't like stopping on odd numbers. Let me see here. Yeah, we're going to stop there for tonight. I'll pick back up at page 113 sometime in the near future, but I need to go work out. Love y'all. It's been an exciting, thrilling day. And coming up, I will do your romance help advice. I will do a song that you requested me to sing for the umpteenth millionth time. And you'll get a rating of that book in time. Thank you. God bless. Love each and every one of you. Thank you for being my supporters by watching the videos. Thank you for being here. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Wear your mask. Keep your social distance. Keep that wonderful hand sanitizer close at all times. God bless. Love y'all.